Hello, it's Ego here, and you're listening to The Whole Bean. This is episode 1. I believe this is episode 1. I recorded an episode right before this one, but I have a feeling this one is going to be episode 1. Today, we're going to be talking about self-perception, how I see myself versus how people see me. And I wanted to start out with a parable because I love a good parable. And I don't know if you've heard of this one, but this is the parable of the blind man and an elephant. And it's one of those really, really old parables that comes from Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain texts, I think. I'm not sure. I have to cross-check that, but I believe that is true. Okay, this is how it goes. Once upon a time, there was a village, and in that village, a group of blind men heard that a strange animal that is called an elephant had been brought to town, and none of them were aware of its shape and form because, even the people who could see in the village had never seen one before, and they were blind, so they definitely hadn't seen it before. So out of curiosity, they said, we must inspect it and know it by touch. And so they went and they sought it out. And when they found it, they all groped about it in different parts, like at different parts of the elephant. And the first blind man, whose hand landed on the trunk, said, this thing is like a thick snake. And the other one, whose hand reached the ear of the elephant, said, the elephant is like a fan. It's a kind of fan. And another person, a third blind man, whose hand was touching the leg of the elephant, said, the elephant must be like a pillar because it's like a tree trunk. And the fourth blind man, whose hand was placed on the side of the elephant, said, the elephant must be a wall. It's a wall. And another one who felt the tail of the elephant described it like a rope. And the last of the blind men, who was feeling the tusk of the elephant, stated that the elephant is hard and smooth and is spear-like. It must be like a spear. Over time, this parable has been used to illustrate a lot of different points, and a lot of different stories have been told and interpreted based off of different points of views, which in itself is some kind of paradox, because the point of the parable is that different people perceive things from many different points of view, right? In some explanations, in some versions, the blind men go on to discuss what they found and completely disagree with each other to the point where they came to blows because they just wouldn't take each other's perspectives as truth. And in other versions of the story, it ends with them coming into some form of agreement that they all were partially correct and were all partially wrong. And the point of those versions of the story is that while one subjective experience might be true, it is not the totality of truth because it is a partial truth. And this parable just came to mind when I was thinking about self-perception, how we perceive ourselves, how others perceive us, the limits of self-perception, and the importance of having complete context in observing yourself as a human being. And I had been thinking about this for a while, but I just haven't had the words to put to my thoughts until earlier this week when I saw a tweet from Ari Lennox, the artist, and it was in a very roundabout way the catalyst for putting together my thoughts on this episode finally. And I'm going to quote her. So what she said was, I hate that I crave validation in every ounce of my life. It is truly a miserable existence. I hate that I wish that I was cool. I'm embarrassing. I don't know when I'll ever start loving myself. I don't know if it's possible. I can't even enjoy all that I've created for myself. And as relatable to me, I could relate to that sentiment, as relatable as it was. You're scrolling through the comments and the replies, and Twitter being the hellscape that it is. Of course, the responses range from people feeling sad that she felt that way about herself, right? To people who thought it was just clickbait and she was trying to get sympathy streams or something like that. People are weird. I don't know what is wrong with people. But anyway, I found it to be really relatable because as someone that listens to Ari Lennox's music, I find her to be so cool. As many other people were saying in her comments and in her replies, were saying they can't even imagine someone like her thinking she is not cool. And that's why I find it so relatable, because I do think there is this weird discrepancy in how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others. And I know that for a fact because I found myself cringing when people would describe me and how they perceive me. Because for the life of me, at some point, especially when I'm younger, I feel like this has gotten better. I have a much stronger, much better perception of myself a healthier sense of self than I did when I was younger. But to just hear people describe me and the people in my lives who are just such beautiful mirrors and make it a point to reflect the best parts of me to me, them describing me used to make me feel so cringy because I just didn't see myself the way they saw me. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, because even though it was shocking that she would feel that way, it wasn't surprising that she would feel that way. And so that really got me thinking about why we are more inclined to focus on the negative when we're perceiving ourselves. And it's usually not because we don't think like there are positive things about ourselves. And there are lots of different things that contributes to this. There's trauma, there's people literally having to grow up in situations where like they've been in emotionally abusive and verbally abusive situations when they were younger that just warped and really screwed up their sense of self. There are very legitimate reasons why. But another part of it that I think cuts across the whole human experience, it's just there is a huge gap between the way we see ourselves and the way we perceive the negatives in ourselves. We have a tendency to blow up the negatives and not focus as much on the positive. Part of that, I think, is because we live in a society that kind of encourages us to be humble, to think of ourselves as smaller and wait for other people to lift us up, as opposed to us constantly lifting ourselves up. You know, people like to be the one to tell you that you're pretty. They like to be the one to tell you that you look good. But some people don't like it when you know that for yourself. Then you're accused of being proud, of being self-aggrandizing, of being braggadocious, and a lot of other words. But in thinking about this and really trying to explore what this feeling is, but more how to navigate it, there are 3 different things that came up for me, and that's what I'd like to share in today's episode. So I'm going to share 3 thoughts that I think we should try to remember on those days when we're feeling most like the version of ourselves that we don't really like, when you're not feeling, your best. What are 3 things to keep in mind? And before I get to those things, I just wanted to add this quote by Carl Jung that it bubbled up so strongly when I was thinking about this, and it kind of cuts across all the 3 lessons that I learned and I'm going to share. And he says, "But there is no energy unless there is a tension of opposites. Hence, it is necessary to discover the opposite to the attitude of the conscious mind. In other words, in order for action to happen, there has to be a pull between the opposites, between what is happening on the positive end and on the negative end, right? So in order to figure out the opposite, you have to pay attention to what your conscious mind, to the attitude that you're portraying in your conscious mind. Wherever that is, the opposite it also has something to say, right? And the way I interpreted it is that in any complicated system, there are always going to be narratives that are contradictory, but at the same time, they are true. In every single complicated system, there are narratives, there are things, there are events, there are reactions that are always contradictory, yet simultaneously true. And honestly, what is more complicated than the human condition? Nothing is more complicated than the human condition, because we all exist in polarity. And I feel like that's sometimes like where this initial struggle comes from. We forget that in order for there to be darkness, there has to be light. There's good because we can observe bad. All these things happen in duality in our society, and it exists within us too. So I think that the issue in itself is that we tend to focus so much on the negatives, and we allow the negatives to overwhelm the positive aspects of our lives. But let's get back on track. What are 3 thoughts that we should try to remember on the days when we're feeling most like the version of ourselves that we don't like? The first thing I like to think of is that you should focus on the net positive. And the net positive is when an event or an entity has an impact that is overall more positive than negative. So even if something that doesn't feel good is happening, if the effect that it has is overall, at the end of the day, more positive than negative, then we would call that a net positive, right? You're essentially counting your losses. And sometimes when you're in that space of like trying to work on yourself, we forget very much that we are human. And as a human, you have to accept the duality of you. You are not just one thing, you are more than one thing. And the presence of the so-called bad doesn't negate the good. And we hear this all the time from the greats. We see it play out. None of the people that we admire, none of the people that we grew up listening to, reading, even the people that we engage with on a regular basis are all just bad. And no matter how admirable they are, they were not without faults, they were not without flaws, they were not without their insecurities and their fears. Most of them had to do the things that they did despite all of this, in spite of it, with it. They had to work with it. They were not without bad days. And this actually leads back to the Carl Jung quote that I was talking about earlier, because in many ways, the very presence of a negative indicates the presence of a positive too. Because you can have courage even if you feel fear, and you can still go on and be a confident person even if you don't always feel that way on the inside. And you can be incredibly gracious and sometimes find yourself being impatient with the people that you love or with yourself. Just because there is a presence of a negative and you have a negative feeling doesn't mean the entire absence of the positive. And sometimes we just pay so much attention to the negative parts that we don't like. We give it so much attention. We blow it up instead of focusing so much more on the positive aspects, the part that we actually should be focusing on. And we forget that what we give attention to grows. What you water grows. So you don't want to be paying attention to the negative as much as we're drawn to. I feel like even the society that we are in kind of makes us like inclined to think negatively. It's the doomsday, right? That's what we see. So I'm not saying it's easy, but you definitely want to get into the habit and start practicing focusing on the positive aspects. Nobody is all bad. You are not all bad. And just because you're scared to do something doesn't mean you can't do it. As a matter of fact, the fact that you're scared to do that thing might be the strongest indicator that you are capable of doing that thing. And it only feels scary because you are attempting to go outside of your comfort zone. So there is a bit of push and pull, right? But it shouldn't deter you. It should be confirmation that you are capable of doing the thing that you're doing, which is why you're having such an adverse reaction to it. There are many different parts to this elephant that you're touching, and you have to look at yourself as a whole, not just as a sum of all the negative parts of you. You are a combination of the beautiful parts of yourself and the flaws. And while I don't want to sit here and say you should accept all your flaws and all your faults as a part of you and not do anything to change them, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you don't want to focus so much on them that you totally negate the beautiful parts and the positive aspects of you, because doing that will only magnify the parts that you don't want to magnify at all. You want to focus on celebrating and practicing being more of the parts of you that you love. And in doing that, you will blow them up, and eventually they will be the parts that you will see the most. They will be the parts that other people see the most about you. One of the most beautiful things about observing us as human beings anyway is our duality. We are multiple things at the same time, and that is something that we should be celebrated, not ignored. And that leads me to the next lesson that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this topic. And this one might be a hot take, but you want to learn to work with the feeling instead of focusing on getting rid of it, which is something that I think we do a lot of. The truth is, you don't have to feel good to do the good thing, to do the right thing. You don't have to feel good about it, not all the time. And I started making real progress when I really let that sink in. Because when it comes to self-perception and learning to accept yourself and showing up for yourself, what is more important than how I feel is the fact that I want to show up for myself. I deserve that. And so do you. Especially when I know that despite how I feel or how insecure I'm feeling when I wake up in a day, whatever it is the feeling is, I will show up for my job. We have this tendency of showing up for other people, showing up for jobs, for things that like we don't even respect, we don't even really like, it doesn't bring us joy, but we show up for those things. We show up for other people. We show up for the paycheck because we know, deep down at the end of the day that it doesn't matter how you feel. What matters more than how you feel is that you know the right thing to do and you're willing to show up for it, and we just need to bring that energy to ourselves. We have to show up for ourselves, and we have to be more faithful to ourselves than we are to other people. And I'm not saying it's easy. The road to developing a healthy sense of self and keeping your word to yourself is not an easy one. But at some point, I just started realizing if I keep waiting to feel good, then I probably won't even do anything, because the good feelings were far and few in between, and the feeling of confidence and the feeling, it was taking too long for me to get to the point where I was motivated to do the thing. We spend so much time trying to make sure that we are the most like optimum version of ourselves and we're operating at quote unquote full capacity before we can show up for ourselves and do the things that we've committed ourselves to doing. So at some point, I just had to let myself be sad. And I was saying to myself, I can be sad and do the things that I want to do. I can be insecure. I can feel insecure and do the things that I want to do and show up for what I want to do and who I want to be. And sometimes that means lowering the stakes and setting smaller goals and just focusing on the process. Just focus on the small thing. Lowering the stakes is sometimes one of the best things that you can do, because that way you're not fully halted. You haven't stopped. There's still some momentum. And anything is better than zero. You are moving. You are learning something along the way. So you can feel as scared as you want, but you show up. You can feel as insecure as you want, but you still show up. And I used to say to myself, let me be sad and clean my room. Let me be sad and send that email. Let me be sad, but I'll put on a little makeup. Let me be sad, but I'll edit that video. I'll take my vitamins. I will still show up and try to learn that language. I'm showing up for myself. And I think it sounds a little depressing, but for me, it was very helpful. It was elevating. It was more encouraging than just sitting and waiting for the feeling to pass. Because the thing that we also forget is that the time will pass regardless. The time is going to pass. And when it passes, do you want to be at the exact same spot that you were before? No, you don't. And you can't spend your life trying to fix it. You have to live it. You have to create it as you go. And the third lesson is that you have to change with love. I love that phrase. I have it written on like 3 different Post-it notes around my apartment. I just like to look at it. Whatever you want to change, you have to change it from a place of love. Because I don't think you can effectively create sustainable change within yourself from a place of hate, which is why I actually found myself over time distancing myself from, like the self-motivation gurus and those messages. There are some great ones out there, but a lot of those messages just reinforce the fact that you almost don't have to like yourself, and it's all about pushing and pushing and pushing yourself to be the most optimum version of you, which I don't really believe in. I would like to feel like at the end of my life, I've spent it being a good and a kind person, regardless of how society chooses to describe productivity. I really don't want to strive to be the most productive person ever, especially from the point of view of trying to fix myself and making myself being able to go and achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve. I really want to achieve truly. I want to achieve something. Of course, we want to achieve something. You want a life well lived. We want to create a good life for ourselves, but you don't have to break yourself to do it. And you definitely don't have to hate yourself to do it. There is something to be said about making sure that you see yourself for who you really are and that you accept yourself for all that you are. That is the most sustainable starting point, because if you start trying to fix things about yourself from a self-hate perspective, it is just not going to work. You are going to burn yourself out early, which I think is even good case scenario, because there are some people who don't burn out early and they build an entire life based off of self-hate. And if you've ever interacted or you've ever had anyone in your life or in your circle, in your world, be a self-hating person, they are the most infuriating people to be around. You don't want to be around. Nobody wants to be around a person that doesn't like themselves. It shows. So the question I want to leave with you is, how do you see yourself? How different is it from how people see you? And what steps can you take to bridging that gap, to making sure that you are focusing on the best parts of yourself? Because back to the Ari Lennox quote, I know it sounded, like really sad and really solemn that she thinks that way about herself, but there's a very strong chance that she doesn't feel that way about herself every single day. And I personally don't think that it is wrong for her to come out and express that that is a way that she feels about herself, that she thinks she is embarrassing and she is cool. Because at least for me, it goes to show that even someone as cool as her has days where she feels like she's not cool. That in itself is something that I've struggled with over time, and is why I try as much as possible to tell the people that are around me what I think about them. And if I'm being honest, I don't do a very good job at it, but part of it I think is mostly because like my upbringing doesn't really, like I wasn't really brought up in the kind of, situations where like we're taught to show how we love each other by like acts of service and things, but to sit down and really tell someone how you perceive them is something that I had to teach myself actively. Now, if someone ever, like someone that I love, if one of my loved ones walked up to me and asked me what I thought of them, I would be quick to tell them exactly how I see them. but I would like to do it more organically, more, automatically. And I find myself doing it, and I find myself doing it more and more and more. But I do wish it is something that we will cultivate a little bit more, because it never goes unnoticed to me when I tell someone how beautiful, how cool I think they are, and they're shocked. They're shocked. Like I tell someone, oh my goodness, I think you're really cool, like the way you do your makeup, and they just like, to them, they're just being them. But I also like to bring this back to community, because we don't live in isolation. The people that we choose to keep around us also contribute to our sense of self, right? Which is why we have to be selective about it. A lot of times, the people in our lives are mirrors and are capable of reflecting different versions of ourselves to each other. So you have to make sure that the people around you are reflecting a version of you that you want to see, not someone who benefits from showing you the most negative parts of yourself or bringing out the most negative parts of yourself. You have to work on your sense of self, but I don't think we can do that without community. Community is very, very important. And so choosing the people in your community is not something that you should take lightly. It is a very, very important thing. So if your self-perception is something that you think about often or that you struggle with, and it makes you feel a little frightened about what's coming next, how people perceive you, I don't think you should be. I think there is value in embracing uncertainty and embracing both the positive and the negative aspects of who you are. I don't believe that you should spend most of your life trying to fix yourself. You should allow yourself to be curious about yourself. Allow yourself to be curious about the best parts of you, instead of focusing so much on how bad you are and how insecure you are and how not brave you are and how fearful you are. You can allow the uncertainty. You can sit with it. You can sit with the uncertainty and allow it to lead you to wonderful places. You have one life, and I want you to indulge it. I want you to live it as bravely as you can, as it challenges you to exercise both your heart and your mind. Forge your own path towards your own happiness. Don't waste time with regret. Don't waste time trying to prove to people that you are not broken, or trying to hide the parts of you that you think are broken from other people. Let yourself spin wildly into your next action. Enjoy the present moment. Enjoy each moment as it comes, because you never get one quite like it, but also you will get older and then appreciate the fact that you weren't so hard on yourself when you were younger, that you did the best that you could. And if you know better, take small, simple, courageous steps to doing the best that you can every single day. If at any point in time you ever look up and you find yourself feeling lost, you can pause, you can stop, you can rest, you can simply take a breath and start all over again, or continue from where you stop. You can retrace your steps. I like to say you can pivot. I am the queen of pivot. You can change your mind about your life at any point in time and go back to the purest place in your life, wherever it is in your heart where hope lives. I hope you always find yourself there. I hope that part is the loudest part for you, and I hope you found it helpful. This is a new podcast, so if you did find it helpful and you think it'll be helpful to someone else, please like and share it with other people. Post it on your social media platforms. Let them know that something nice, something good is starting over here. I really appreciate you listening, especially if you made it all the way to this point. You have no idea how much it means to me that you're here listening to my wildly, what I think are sometimes incoherent thoughts. I am the queen of speaking in run-on sentences, but I still appreciate you listening. And I had a lot of fun recording this. And I hope you have an amazing week ahead, and that you are not hard on yourself. You can always, always, always find ways to be gentler with yourself. Okay? If you're an adult and you're raising yourself, raise yourself responsibly, which means if you're going to do the hard things, make sure that you always give yourself enough love. You can't overdose on self-love, okay? So while you're taking responsibility for yourself and for your actions and your consequences, remember to love yourself. And I hope to find you in good spirits on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.